Okay, in this segment of the video, I'm going to be talking about moving from analysis into organization, or from analyzing to organizing. In the previous segment, I went through about a 10 to 12 minute process of breaking down the poem, of seeing what's going on, and I've brought these notes back up. And so now what I need to do, and spend some time of my 20-minute prep time doing, is planning how I'm going to take this poem and put it into a form that I can then set up an organized, clear, opinion-based, but textually supported commentary about what I see going on here. A lot of people will often take what I would just call a linear approach, which is basically, okay, the first thing I'm going to do is talk about the first stanza, the second thing I'm going to do is talk about the second stanza, and so forth. I think that's a very simple organizational pattern, and simple isn't always good. Simple implies that that's about all you could come up with. So what I'm going to try to do here is look at some alternative processes. I provided you a graphic organizer in class, and I would encourage you to use that when you practice, because what it does is it takes the process and it turns it a little bit more, and I know this is not the right angle to put on the screen here, but maybe you can get an idea here. Rather than simply take what's given to me and use the poem and its organizational structure for my organization, whether you use a simple outline or something like this to practice, I think it's important that the commentary is about your central idea. It's about your argument on the poem as supported by the text. So what I'm going to try to walk through here is how I come up with that argument, and then how I'm going to manipulate the poem and not just take the structure that's given to me to come up with a commentary. The first thing I want to do as I'm planning my thoughts is I want to get at the central idea of this poem, and I'm going to phrase that in the form of a thesis. As I read it and as I kind of dug into it, to me the central idea of this poem is that humans are always in a hurry, and the speaker seems to believe that that's not a good thing and that there's a cost to our haste. The old expression, haste makes waste, comes to mind, and I'm just going to kind of write that here in the margins because I think it's important, and I think it's an easy way for me to remember what this poem is really about. I would probably even write out my central argument. Humans rush through life and miss out on life. I'm going to say that, or something like that, as my main opening point in my argument. This is evidence in the poem from the first line, where the child who is talking to the speaker in this context says, "I'm rising 5," and I think this expression here, rising, means I'm going on, is how we often say it here. "I'm about to be 5," he said, "not 4." So even in childhood, the little boy is rushing forward, even at a young age. He's beginning to move quickly through life, and we get kind of a series of childhood images here. His spectacles, standing in a meadow, reflecting cones of light above his toffee-buckled cheeks, and then a kind of specific detail. He'd been alive 56 months, so he's not quite 5 years old. He's about to turn 5, not 4. And so, again, as I look through the poem for evidence of my argument, that's where I find some. We rush through life. Children do it. Adults do it. And I think even nature does it. We're going to see that in a minute. This is a repeated kind of structural motif of the poem, this right hand, left hand, kind of moving our eye back and forth across the page. It looks a little bit like the ticking of a clock. If you can kind of see the pendulum motion there going back and forth. Not 4, but rising 5. We're all in that state of not now, but what's next. In the second stanza, there's a huge shift here, and I'm going to organize my first point perhaps might be about that shift. That there's a shift from the boy to nature. There's a shift later from nature back to people. And I think that the writer here is shifting and also making a connection. What the boy sees around him in the field, the cells of spring bubbled and doubled, maybe the reason that he's hastening his life or rushing toward the next stage is he sees this reflected in nature. Buds are blooming, shoots and stems shook out the creases from their frills. Nature is always on the move, so why shouldn't we be? There's the imagery of green and blossoming, forming of the fruit. All of these are images of progress. So I think the first note I'm going to make, and the first point I'm going to make about this humans rush through life, is this shift from humans do it and nature, right? Or hurry, or rushing forward. Again, I'm not exactly following the structure here. I may make some comments about either one of these stanzas, or possibly even later into the poem. This line might support this too. The new buds push the old leaves from the bough. Something new is always more interesting than what is now or what has been. A second point, as I organize my thoughts here, I'm going to talk about the structure of the poem. And particularly, I'm going to talk about these enjambed lines. And you can look up a definition of enjam, but these lines are set off by both punctuation, and they're also set off by this large, if you remember way back in Beowulf, there's this large caesura, or break in the page here. There's almost an Anglo-Saxon quality here. I don't want to go too far in that direction, but there's this large visual break on the page. I'm going to call it caesura. But even if you don't know the term, we can physically see the shape of the poem on the page. And I'm going to try to make some sense of these expressions here. There seems to be a pattern, not 4 but rising 5, not May but rising June, not day but rising night. And it's interesting to me that visually on the page, these lines, not 4, not May, not day, not now, come on the right-hand side of the page, which for us is usually the end of something as we read this from left to right. And so we're quickly coming to the end and already jumping to the next thing. And so these next lines are set up on the left-hand side of the page. Again, if this is an ending and this is a new beginning, our attention is always on the new beginning and rarely on where we are at the end of something. Not May but rising June, not day but rising night. So I'm going to try to bring into my commentary how the structure and this shape of the poem relate to meaning, relate to this idea that humans rush through life. And so even physically on the page, our eyes kind of rush from the end of one line to the next. It's a bit of a visual trick that the poet seems to be playing. I want to save some time in my comments, and I want to make sure in my comments that I address the ending of the poem. Again, you can tell I'm kind of struggling with this particular stanza. All I may talk about with this stanza actually is this issue of structure, because as you see in this stanza, that structure of right then left, it becomes narrower. These lines actually become closer together, and so this structure is really on display in this stanza. So that may be all that I do with this third stanza. And by the way, if you're having trouble with the stanza, don't ignore it, but see where you can fit it in, refer to it, comment on it, but don't make it the center of your commentary. My third point is going to be the concluding lines and imagery. And I think what I'm going to try to do here is talk about how this last particular stanza brings together the boy from stanza 1. It brings together the nature from stanza 2. And it continues this structure that we've seen in all the stanzas of the Caesura. It introduces the word we. So again, it connects us, the reader, possibly the speaker, and the subjects of the poem. The boy, for example, maybe even the unnamed speaker to whom the boy is speaking. And it kind of draws in this generalization. It uses the imagery of childhood, the boy throwing away his toffee wrappers. This to me is a pretty interesting image. That candy that we eat, we're always looking for the next candy. The taste is very brief and temporary. By the time we've thrown away the toffee wrapper, in some cases the toffee is gone, it's melted in our mouth, or we've eaten it. We never see the flower, but only the fruit. Again, there's this progression here, never the fruit, but the rot in the fruit. It's always the next thing, and if you notice, of course, these go across the page. Fruit and rot kind of mirror this image here, don't they? Not day, but night. So even though there are words in here, even though there's no caesura, the position on the page is still the same. And the idea here, we look for the marriage bed in the baby's cradle. Notice how bed and cradle are on the margins here, much like the enjambed lines were earlier. And then, of course, bed and dead, of course, are a strong contrast here. And so in my conclusion, I think I'm going to address how this particular stanza pulls everything in the poem together and gets at, again, this main idea. All of my points elaborate on and discuss this main idea. I am using kind of a linear approach. Most of my first comments are going to deal with these two stanzas. As I deal with structure, I'm going to deal with these two and this third. And of course, as my concluding comments deal with the concluding stanza, I guess you could argue this is kind of a linear approach. But I don't want to simply go through and paraphrase or simply interpret line by line. I'm going to make this my main argument. Humans rush through life and miss out on life. I'm going to go into my 3 developing points. And this third point is actually going to become my conclusion. And I'm going to try to do that in 7 to 8 minutes. Have I discussed the role of the little boy who is rising 5? I think I will have discussed that in this poem. I think I will have discussed how repetition and other structural devices. So I think I will have answered these confirming or guiding questions. In the next video, what I will do is try to deliver a 7 to 8 minute commentary on the poem, so you can kind of see what the end result of this process might look like. There's no right way to analyze a poem. There's no one right way to organize a commentary. And there's no one right way to deliver one, but I hope this is helping you kind of see, to unfold the process that really happens inside an individual's mind and put it out in front of you on paper where you can look at it and maybe see how it works.